You have been lied to. The Great Wall of China, 13,171 miles of continuous fortification stretching across mountain ridges, deserts, and plateaus, was allegedly constructed by the Ming dynasty between the years 1400 and 1644. 244 years. Let that number settle. 244 years to lay brick, stone, and rammed earth across a distance that would stretch halfway around the equator. The official narrative tells us that peasant laborers, wielding nothing more than wooden scaffolding, hemp rope, and rudimentary kilns, managed to produce and install approximately 3,800,000,000 bricks. Not stones pulled from quarries. Not timber felled from nearby forests. Bricks. Fired clay bricks that required kilns, fuel, transportation, and installation at elevations exceeding 8,000 feet above sea level. The math doesn't just fail, it insults the intelligence of anyone who has ever held a tool. Let us begin with the bricks themselves. 3,800,000,000 standardized clay bricks, each brick weighing approximately 15 pounds. Each brick requiring clay extraction, molding, drying, firing at temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, cooling, and transportation to a construction site that spans terrain so hostile that modern highways struggle to traverse it. The Ming dynasty, we are told, accomplished this with manual labor. No rail system, no combustion engines, no mechanized transport. To meet the construction deadline, workers would have needed to produce, fire, and install 42,612 bricks every single day for 244 years without pause. Every day. No winters off, no plagues, no famines, no dynastic collapses. 42,000 bricks per day is 1,775 bricks per hour, assuming a 24-hour work cycle. That is 29 bricks per minute. That is one brick every 2 seconds, extracted from the earth, shaped, dried, fired, cooled, transported across mountains, and mortared into place for 244 years. Now consider the kilns. A traditional Chinese brick kiln of the Ming era could fire approximately 3,000 bricks per cycle. Each firing cycle required 3 to 5 days, including loading, firing, and cooling. To produce 42,612 bricks per day, you would need a minimum of 14 kilns operating simultaneously, completing a full cycle every single day. But kilns do not operate on conveyor schedules. Clay must dry before firing, or the bricks explode. Kilns must cool before unloading, or the workers die. Realistically, each kiln would complete 2 cycles per week, meaning you would need 49 kilns in constant rotation just to meet the daily quota, 49 kilns. Each kiln requiring construction, maintenance, and fuel, 49 kilns scattered across a construction zone spanning 13,000 miles of hostile geography. Who built the kilns? Where are the kiln sites? Why have archaeological surveys failed to locate the residue of 49 industrial-scale brick kilns operating for 2.5 centuries? Let us discuss fuel. Each kiln firing consumed approximately 2 tons of coal or 4 tons of wood. 49 kilns operating continuously would require 98 tons of coal per day, or 35,770 tons per year. Over 244 years, that totals 8,727,880 tons of coal. Where did it come from? The mountainous regions of northern China in the 15th century were not industrial coal basins. Coal had to be mined, transported, and stockpiled at kiln sites scattered across thousands of miles. There is no record of coal mines operating at the scale necessary to supply this operation. There is no record of the logistics network required to move 8 million tons of fuel across a mountain range. The fossil record is silent. The infrastructure is invisible. But let us go deeper into the coal problem, because this is where the official story begins to disintegrate completely. 8 million tons of coal over 244 years assumes efficient extraction and perfect distribution. In reality, coal mining in 15th century China was primitive. Miners used picks and baskets. A skilled miner could extract perhaps half a ton of coal per day under ideal conditions. To produce 98 tons of coal daily would require 196 miners working every single day. But coal seams are not infinite. Mines deplete. New mines must be opened. Miners die from collapse, gas exposure, and flooding. The workforce would need constant replenishment. Over 244 years, accounting for mine depletion and workforce mortality, you would need not 196 miners, but thousands. An entire industry dedicated solely to feeding the kilns that produce the bricks for the wall. Where are the mine shafts? Where are the slag heaps? Where are the tool marks on the coal seams? Modern geological surveys of the regions adjacent to the wall show no evidence of systematic coal extraction at industrial scale during the Ming period. And what about the alternative fuel source? Wood. If coal was unavailable, the kilns would have burned wood. 4 tons of wood per firing cycle. 49 kilns would consume 196 tons of wood per day. That is 71,540 tons per year. Over 244 years, that totals 17,456,000 tons of wood. A mature oak tree yields approximately 2 tons of usable timber. That means 8,728,000 trees would need to be felled, stripped, cut, and transported to kiln sites across the mountain range. 8 million trees. That is deforestation on a scale that would have stripped entire provinces bare. Where is the evidence of this ecological catastrophe? Where are the records of lumber operations spanning centuries? Where are the stump fields, the erosion patterns, the secondary growth forests that would have emerged after such massive clear-cutting? The landscape shows none of this. The forests adjacent to the wall are old growth, their root systems undisturbed for millennia. Transport presents an even greater problem. Once bricks were fired and cooled, they had to be moved to the construction site. A 15-pound brick is not heavy, but 3,800 million of them represent 57 billion pounds of material. That is 28.5 million tons, distributed across 13,000 miles. That is 2,176 tons of brick per mile. In terrain where a single mile might include a 3,000-foot elevation change. Workers would have used wooden carts, pack animals, or their own backs. A mule can carry 200 pounds. That is 13 bricks. To move 2,176 tons of brick 1 mile would require 322,400 mule trips per mile. For 13,000 miles, the number becomes incomprehensible. The animals required do not exist. The feed required to sustain those animals does not exist. The roads required to move those animals do not exist. Let us calculate the feed requirements. A working mule consumes approximately 20 pounds of grain and hay per day. 322,000 mules would require 6,440,000 pounds of feed per day. That is 3,220 tons per day. Where did it come from? How was it stored? A ton of hay occupies approximately 100 cubic feet when baled. 3,220 tons would require 322,000 cubic feet of storage. That is a barn 700 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 46 feet tall, filled to capacity, every single day, for the mules working on a single mile of the wall. Multiply that across 13,000 miles, and you are describing an agricultural and logistical operation that dwarfs the construction of the wall itself. And yet, the wall exists. It sits on the ridgeline, perfectly aligned. Its course is level. Its watchtowers positioned at intervals, suggesting a centralized engineering schema. The stones do not care about our math. They simply are. Consider the workforce. To lay 42,000 bricks per day would require, at minimum, 10,000 workers operating simultaneously. Each worker would need to lay 4 bricks per day. That sounds reasonable until you account for the tasks required. Bricks must be mortared. Mortar must be mixed. Mixing mortar requires lime, sand, and water. Lime must be produced by heating limestone to 900 degrees Celsius. That requires more kilns, more fuel, more logistics. Each worker also needs food. 10,000 workers consume approximately 20,000 pounds of grain per day. Over 244 years, that is 1,784,000,000 pounds of grain. Where did it come from? How was it transported? Where are the granaries? The official records describe occasional supply caravans. Occasional. A workforce of 10,000 does not eat occasionally. Let us examine the lime production in detail. Mortar is composed of 1 part lime to 3 parts sand, mixed with water. To bond 42,000 bricks per day would require approximately 15 tons of mortar. That is 3.75 tons of lime. Lime is produced by heating limestone in kilns to temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius, driving off carbon dioxide and leaving calcium oxide. The process is fuel-intensive. Producing 1 ton of lime requires approximately 300 pounds of coal or 600 pounds of wood. 3.75 tons of lime per day would require 1,125 pounds of coal or 2,250 pounds of wood per day for 244 years. That is an additional 99,981 tons of coal over the construction period, not counting the fuel needed for brick production. Where did this coal come from? It is not included in the 8 million ton estimate for brick kilns. It is additional. It is invisible in the historical record. Housing adds another layer of impossibility. 10,000 workers cannot sleep on exposed ridgelines in winter. Temperatures in northern China during the Ming Dynasty regularly dropped below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Workers would have required barracks, heating, clothing, and medical care. Each barracks housing 100 men would require timber, nails, and foundations. That is 100 barracks. Multiply that across 13,000 miles, and you are constructing a parallel city the length of the wall itself. Where are the ruins of these worker cities? Where are the foundations, the fire pits, the latrines? Archaeological surveys have found scattered campsites. Scattered. Not the continuous infrastructure required to sustain an industrial operation of this scale. Consider the medical care alone. 10,000 workers engaged in heavy labor at high altitude would experience injuries, illnesses, and chronic conditions at rates far exceeding modern construction sites. Broken bones from falls, crushed limbs from falling stones, respiratory infections from exposure, dysentery from contaminated water, frostbite, heat stroke. A conservative estimate suggests that at any given time, 5% of the workforce would be incapacitated. That is 500 workers requiring medical attention simultaneously. Where are the hospitals, the physicians, the medical supplies? Traditional Chinese medicine of the Ming era relied on herbal remedies, acupuncture, and rudimentary surgery, effective but limited. Treating 500 injured workers daily would require a medical corps numbering in the hundreds, supported by herbalists, pharmacists, and supply chains for medicinal plants, many of which do not grow at high altitude. None of this infrastructure appears in the historical record. The official story also ignores the weather. Northern China experiences monsoons, droughts, and blizzards. Construction would have halted during winter months, cutting the effective working year to perhaps 200 days. Recalculate the daily brick quota with a 200-day work year, and the number jumps to 51,934 bricks per day. Every worker must now lay 5 bricks per day instead of 4. Every kiln must fire an additional 1,600 bricks per cycle. The fuel requirements increase by 30%. The math becomes even more punishing, and yet we are expected to believe it happened. There is also the matter of mortality. Construction sites kill workers. Falls, collapsed scaffolding, rock slides, exposure, disease. A conservative estimate suggests a mortality rate of 2% per year for a workforce engaged in heavy construction at high altitude. 10,000 workers at 2% annual mortality means 200 deaths per year. Over 244 years, that is 48,800 deaths. Those bodies had to be buried or burned. Where are the mass graves? Where are the cremation sites? The official records mention occasional accidents. Occasional. 48,000 dead is not occasional. That is a body every other day for 2.5 centuries. That is entire generations of workers dying on the wall, their bones contributing to the foundation they were building. Some researchers have noted unusual soil chemistry in areas adjacent to the wall, concentrations of calcium and phosphorus consistent with mass burial sites. But these findings are dismissed as natural variation, not investigated as evidence of mass death. Now consider the alternative. What if the wall was not built by the Ming dynasty? What if the Ming dynasty inherited the wall? Historical records describe the Ming effort as restoration and reinforcement. Restoration of what? Reinforcement of something that already existed. The Mongols, who ruled China before the Ming, made no mention of building the wall. The Yuan dynasty records describe the wall as already ancient. The Song dynasty before them also described it as old. How old? When you track the references backward, the wall recedes into a fog where records become fragmentary, contradictory, and mythological. The earliest definitive mention appears during the Qin dynasty, around 200 to 21 BC. Emperor Qin Shi Huang is credited with connecting and extending earlier walls, connecting and extending, not building, not originating, connecting fragments of something older. What if those fragments were not walls at all, but the remnants of a boundary? Not a military fortification, but a border left by a civilization that predates the historical record, a civilization that possessed the industrial capacity to move billions of bricks across a mountain range because they had technology we do not recognize. Consider the alignment. The wall follows ridge lines with a precision that suggests aerial surveying. The watchtowers are positioned at intervals that maximize line of sight, as if the builders could see the entire system from above. The wall does not follow the easiest construction routes. It follows the most defensible routes, implying an understanding of terrain that would require either decades of surveying or a single, comprehensive blueprint executed by a centralized authority with resources far beyond a feudal economy. Modern GPS mapping of the wall reveals something extraordinary. The watchtowers are not randomly placed. They follow a mathematical distribution pattern, spaced at intervals that correspond to the maximum visual range of a human observer, accounting for the curvature of the Earth and atmospheric refraction. This is not medieval guesswork. This is optical physics. The builders understood line-of-sight calculations that were not formally codified in Western science until the 17th century. They understood atmospheric lensing. They understood the relationship between elevation, distance, and visual acuity. How? The standard explanation is trial and error, generations of military experience refined through practice. But trial and error does not produce mathematical precision. It produces approximation. The watchtower spacing is not approximate, it is exact. Deviations from the calculated optimal spacing are less than 3% across the entire length of the wall. That is engineering. That is science. That is not the product of peasants with ropes and guesswork. There is another hypothesis, rarely spoken but impossible to ignore once you examine the evidence. The wall aligns with the northernmost boundary of arable land in ancient China. South of the wall, the climate supported rice and millet. North of the wall, the steppe begins. The wall does not merely separate the Han Chinese from the nomadic tribes. It separates two climate zones. What if the wall was not built to keep people out, but to mark a line that existed for reasons we no longer understand? A boundary established before the current climate regime, before the current sea level. The phrase pre-flood carries mythological weight, but flood myths appear in every ancient culture. The Chinese have their own. The story of Gun Yu, the great flood that reshaped the landscape and required divine intervention to control. What if the wall was built during a climate era when the landscape itself was different, when the Gobi Desert was grassland, when the Yellow River flowed through a different channel, when the sea level was 300 feet lower and the coastal plain extended hundreds of miles further east? Geological evidence supports a catastrophic climate shift in the northern hemisphere approximately 12,000 years ago. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests a comet or asteroid impact triggered rapid climate change, mass extinction, and flooding on a scale that would have drowned coastal civilizations and reshaped river systems globally. Ice core data from Greenland shows temperature fluctuations of 15 degrees Celsius occurring within a single decade. That is not gradual climate change. That is apocalypse. If a sophisticated civilization existed in the northern latitudes before the Younger Dryas event, its cities would now be underwater, its agricultural lands buried under sediment, and its survivors scattered into the mountains. The wall could be a remnant of that civilization, a boundary marker that survived because it was built on high ground far from the coast that were obliterated. The survivors of such a cataclysm would have possessed knowledge far exceeding that of the cultures that followed. They would have understood engineering, mathematics, astronomy, and material science. They would have built structures designed to survive geological upheaval, and when they died, their knowledge would have died with them, leaving only the structures as evidence of what once was. The cultures that came after, emerging from the Stone Age into the Bronze Age, would have encountered these structures and marveled at them. They would have incorporated them into their own mythology, attributing them to gods or legendary emperors. They would have restored what they could, using the methods available to them, never understanding the original purpose or the original builders. If the wall predates the Ming Dynasty by millennia, if it was constructed during a climate and technological era we have forgotten, then the restoration efforts of the Ming were precisely that, restoration. They found a structure buried in sediment, eroded by wind, and reclaimed by vegetation. They cleared it. They rebuilt sections using the materials and methods available to them. They placed their stamps and inscriptions on it, claiming it as their own, because victors write history and builders claim glory. But the core of the wall, the foundation, the alignment, the sheer scale, that came from somewhere else. Look at the bricks themselves. The oldest sections, buried beneath Ming-era renovations, show a uniformity that defies hand-molding. The dimensions are consistent to within millimeters. The firing is even, suggesting kiln technology with temperature control beyond what we associate with medieval China. Some bricks bear marks that resemble factory stamps, not the thumbprints of individual craftsmen. Factories imply standardization. Standardization implies industrial coordination. Industrial coordination implies a centralized state with resources and technology that do not fit the narrative of a feudal empire struggling to defend its borders. The marks on these ancient bricks are not Chinese characters. They are symbols, geometric patterns that repeat across thousands of miles, suggesting a unified production system operating on a continental scale. Then there are the anomalies, sections of the wall constructed from stones weighing several tons, fitted together without mortar, the joints so tight that a blade cannot fit between them. This is not brick and mortar construction. This is megalithic construction, identical in technique to walls found in Peru, Egypt, and Lebanon. Walls attributed to cultures separated by oceans and millennia, yet sharing construction methods that modern engineers struggle to replicate. The official explanation is convergent evolution, the idea that separate cultures independently developed identical solutions to the problem of moving and fitting multi-ton stones. But convergent evolution does not explain identical tool marks. It does not explain identical joinery techniques. It does not explain identical orientations to cardinal directions and astronomical alignments. The parallels to Sacsayhuaman in Peru are particularly striking. Both structures use polygonal masonry. Both structures fit multi-ton stones together with joints so precise that mortar is unnecessary. Both structures are attributed to cultures that supposedly lacked iron tools, wheeled vehicles, and written mathematical systems. Both structures have been restored by later cultures that left their marks on top of the original construction, and both structures are aligned to astronomical phenomena. Sections of the Great Wall align to the winter solstice sunrise. Sacsayhuaman aligns to the Southern Cross. Coincidence, or evidence of a shared knowledge system that spanned continents, a global civilization that built to the same standards, using the same techniques, oriented to the same celestial markers, before some cataclysm erased it from the map and from memory. Some researchers have noted electromagnetic anomalies along the wall, sections where compasses behave erratically, sections where the stone composition includes high concentrations of magnetite and quartz, materials that can hold and conduct electrical charge. What if the wall was not merely a physical barrier but a functional structure, a conductor, a capacitor, a device designed to interact with atmospheric electricity in ways we no longer understand because we have lost the science that built it? The ancient Chinese were obsessed with qi, the flow of energy through the landscape. They built their cities and tombs according to feng shui, the art of aligning structures with natural energy currents. What if feng shui was not superstition, but applied science? What if the wall was the ultimate feng shui construction, a continental scale circuit designed to channel or block energy flows we no longer measure? Consider the evidence from other ancient structures. The Great Pyramid of Giza is constructed from limestone containing high concentrations of quartz crystal. The interior shafts are lined with granite, which contains even higher concentrations of quartz and feldspar, both piezoelectric materials that generate electrical charge under pressure. The pyramid was originally capped with electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, both excellent conductors. The king's chamber contains a granite sarcophagus that resonates at a frequency of 440 Hz when struck, the same frequency as the musical note A, the tuning standard for Western music. Coincidence or design? The pyramid sits on an aquifer. Water flowing through limestone generates electrical potential. The structure is a machine, and we have forgotten what it does because we have forgotten the science that built it. The Great Wall may function similarly. The magnetite deposits along its path could interact with the Earth's magnetic field. The quartz content could generate piezoelectric responses to seismic activity. The sheer mass of the structure could influence local weather patterns through thermal absorption and reflection. The watchtowers could have been more than observation posts. They could have been nodes in a network, transmission points for signals we no longer recognize because we are looking for radio waves and fiber optics when the original technology used principles we have not rediscovered. Some sections of the wall produce audible hums during certain weather conditions, low-frequency vibrations that can be felt through the stones but barely heard. Local populations have reported these phenomena for generations, attributing them to ghosts or dragons. What if these vibrations are evidence of residual function, the wall still attempting to perform a task for which it was designed, even though we no longer understand what that task is? This is where the official narrative collapses entirely. If you accept the brick math, you must accept an invisible industrial infrastructure that left no trace. If you reject the brick math, you must accept that the wall is older than recorded history. If you accept that it is older, you must ask who built it and why the knowledge of its construction was lost. The answers do not fit comfortably into the timeline we teach in schools. They suggest a rise and fall of civilizations that we have not accounted for. They suggest that what we call history is only the most recent chapter, and that earlier chapters were torn out, burned, or buried beneath sediment during events we classify as myth. Walk through any major city and look at the buildings. Look at the foundations of old churches, courthouses, and train stations. Look at the windows, count the floors. Now look at the ground level. In many cities, the first floor is half buried. The original entrance is now a basement. The original windows are below the sidewalk. We are told this is due to sediment accumulation, street level rising over centuries. But sediment does not accumulate at 6 feet per century in the middle of a city unless something catastrophic occurred. Unless there was a flood, a mud flood, a reset event that buried the previous iteration of civilization and forced the survivors to build on top of the ruins. Photographs from the 1800s show cities across Europe, Asia, and North America with buildings buried to the second story. Construction crews excavating foundations regularly find older streets, older buildings, entire layers of civilization beneath the current surface. We call this archaeology. We catalog it. We put it in museums. But we do not ask the obvious question: what event buried these structures? What force deposited 10 feet of sediment across entire continents in the span of a few decades? The official answer is incremental accumulation, slow and steady deposition of dust and debris. But the evidence does not support slow accumulation. The evidence supports rapid burial, mud, water, sediment, carried by a flood so massive that it left a layer of silt across every inhabited region of the planet. The stratigraphy does not lie. Soil cores taken from urban centers worldwide show a distinct layer of fine-grained sediment deposited uniformly at depths corresponding to the late 18th and early 19th centuries. This layer is compositionally different from the soil above and below it. It is sterile, devoid of the organic material that accumulates naturally in inhabited areas. It is flood sediment, waterborne silt deposited rapidly and then compacted under the weight of reconstruction. This is not gradual accumulation. This is evidence of an event that is missing from the historical record because those who survived it were too busy rebuilding to write about it, or because those who controlled the narrative chose not to record it. The Great Wall of China is not evidence of the industrious Ming dynasty. It is evidence of something older, something buried, something we inherited and claimed as our own because we do not remember who built it or why. The wall is not unique. It is part of a global pattern. Megalithic structures on every continent, all attributed to primitive cultures with primitive tools, all defying the mathematics of manual labor. Pyramids in Egypt, temples in Cambodia, fortresses in Peru, dolmens in Korea, all sharing construction techniques, all aligned to celestial markers, all supposedly built independently by cultures that never met. We are not the first advanced civilization. We are the latest. We are scavengers, cleaning the mud from the ruins and etching our names into the stones. We are children playing in the bones of giants, congratulating ourselves for discovering fire while standing in the shadow of a fusion reactor we no longer recognize. The wall is not a monument to human achievement. It is a monument to human amnesia. It is a scar across the landscape, marking the border of a world we forgot. Look at your city. Look at the buried windows. Look at the old buildings with foundations that descend 3 stories underground. Ask why. Ask who built them. Ask what event required us to rebuild on top of what was already there. The stones do not lie. They wait. They wait for us to remember. They wait for us to stop congratulating ourselves for achievements that were handed to us by those who came before. The Great Wall was not built in 244 years by peasants with chisels. It was not built by the Ming Dynasty. It was found by the Ming Dynasty. And if we are honest, truly honest, we must admit that we do not know who built it, when it was built, or why it was necessary. We only know that it is there, immovable, impossible, and waiting for us to ask the right questions. The mathematics do not support the narrative. The logistics do not support the timeline. The evidence does not support the conclusion. What remains is a structure that defies explanation, a monument to a forgotten age, and a reminder that history is written by those who survive, not by those who build. The wall stands as testimony to a truth we are not ready to accept, that we are not the pinnacle of human development, but merely the current iteration in a cycle of rise and fall that stretches back far beyond the reach of our fragile records.